Here we go.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. At least those of us mostly in the Central Time Zone. I'd like to welcome you back to the second half of the Midwestern Fall 2020 meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order. And first, I'd like to invite Greg from Michigan, Greg Gothard, to say a few words in acknowledgement of the tribal lands and nations.
Thank you, Tiffany. Today, we would like to begin the meeting by acknowledgement of the tribal nations that reside and have a cultural connection to this land in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. The area is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. We also acknowledge the Peoria, Fox, and the Sauk peoples' ancestral and traditional lands in the southern portion of the Lower Peninsula. Michigan nuclear facilities reside on lands that were ceded in the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, the 1807 Treaty of Detroit, the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw, the 1821 and 1833 Treaties of Chicago, the 1828 Carey Mission Treaty, and the 1836 Washington Treaty, which include reserved rights to the land. We recognize the 12 federally recognized tribal nations in Michigan and indigenous communities in Michigan who live here now, and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. In offering this land and nation acknowledgement, since we just observed Veterans Day, we would like to recognize the heroic contributions that Native Americans in the state of Michigan made, such as during the Civil War, where nearly 140 men, a regiment of sharpshooters known as Company K from among the tribes in Michigan, volunteered as the first all-Native American sharpshooters regiment. 1/4 of the men of Company K were either killed or wounded in battle, while many gave the ultimate sacrifice on the battlefield. Some of the sharpshooters were also captured. Today, we remember the sharpshooters and many contributions that the tribes in Michigan have made to this great state. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And Tansy, I'd like to thank you for preparing both today's acknowledgement as well as the one from Tuesday that I gave. And
You're welcome.
I will say that in both my experience with this committee as well as the one that I do for the State and Tribal Working Group, one of the things that it has really educated me on is a lot of the history and background that the tribes have across the nation. In fact, in a recent video that I just saw that LM did, my first question was, why are we starting at 1940s and not talking about the land of this area for that, because of the tradition that needs to also be recognized. So we have, I think, mostly the same people. Lisa, do you want to skip housekeeping and all of that, or do you have anything you want to share? Okay, I see a nod. So I will skip that for now. So the only thing that we did not make time for, we did not have an opportunity to do last time on Tuesday, was a state update from Kelly Horn, since he was unable to join us, since he got called away. So Kelly, is there anything you would like to share?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Rodney do that. So if Rodney's on, he can jump in and give the update for Illinois.
He is on, but he's muted right now. So if he's talking, we're not hearing him.
Am I still muted?
No, we hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So major events in Illinois involving transportation of radioactive materials in the past year include the Bedford Park rail car fire and the movement and preparation for the Vermont Yankee rail shipments. Both of those things are going to be talked about thoroughly in this meeting, I believe, so I won't go into those. Routine shipments and inspections and escorts continue, although the total number that we've seen for this year has been significantly reduced due to COVID pandemic. Our year-to-date numbers for radioactive material shipments include 23 HRCQ inspection and escorts, 3 spent fuel inspection and escorts, no WIP shipments this year. We've had 0 violations found. The total activity escorted so far has been 590,000 and approximately 800 terabecquerels. Non-HRCQ Cat 1 shipments that we've tracked were 21 year to date. And as far as the low-level waste shipments, that's also greatly decreased this year, primarily due to the completion of the Zion nuclear plant in December of 2019. But we have had 193 low-level shipment waste shipments that have been tracked so far this year. And that's really all I have for an update. Any questions?
Thank you, Rodney. Next, we will have Mike Valenzano from Oranos talk about the Vermont Yankee shipment presentation, and Mitch is going to get that up on the screen. Mike, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be back. A year ago, I was invited and happy to participate in your meeting in Indianapolis, where I was presenting the planning that was underway as we were about to start shipping the RWCs from Vermont Yankee to WCS. As we'll talk about, the schedule, of course, has been delayed a little bit from what we were proposing a year ago, but we have executed 2 shipments, and we do have some lessons learned. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll just go over again what we've done so far, a little review of the scope and how the work has been progressing, and then we'll get into some lessons learned. So just a reminder, in case anyone didn't see the presentation from last year, this is a decommissioning project, the Vermont Yankee boiling water reactor. Orono is a subcontractor to the licensee North Star, and our responsibility, Orono's responsibility, is the segmentation of the reactor vessel and internals. And as I stressed last year, I'll reiterate again, this project scope has nothing to do with packaging or transportation of used nuclear fuel. And again, for anyone who's new to decommissioning projects, this just gives a little more graphic representation of what we're talking about, taking this very large metal structure and all the internal components, not fuel bearing, and literally just segmenting them, cutting them up into smaller pieces that can then be containerized in smaller baskets and then stored in the RWC, the rad waste canisters, which we transport in the MP197HB cask. Next slide. So here's some images of the RWC loading, and what you can see on the top image is an RWC canister that is inside the shielded transfer cask. So we have a transfer cask that's used on site and a transport cask that's used to ship off site. The transfer cask in this case is the OS197L. And the RWC is inserted in that, then the transfer cask with the RWC canister is placed in the pool. And what you can see, the white box sort of hovering over the transfer cask is one of the smaller baskets that's been preloaded with segmented pieces. And then those baskets are sort of stacked like inside the canister, the RWC canister. And then at the bottom, you can see the lid being placed on the canister before the transfer cask is removed from the pool and taken over to the station platform for final closure, evacuation. We evacuate all the water and dry it before we then transfer the RWC to the horizontal transfer station. Next slide. So here you can see the picture on the left gives you a good sense of the scale of the transfer cask. This is after it's been removed from the pool and is being transferred over to the working platform for closure and evacuation and drying. And then the picture on the right, this is actually, I believe, a picture of the empty cask with the RWC being brought from the skid and trailer, transfer trailer, up to the reactor floor. But if you imagine, it's the same operation in reverse. I was giving you a sense, this cask, we have to go up through from the truck bay up into the reactor building. So it's a lift up a couple stories to get up to the reactor fuel floor. Next slide. I didn't include pictures of the transfer into the horizontal transfer station and into the cask because that was the bulk of the pictures I showed last year with the dry run exercises that we were doing. So I jumped right ahead to RWC shipments. On the top, you can see the MP197HB cask loaded with impact limiters installed and on a rail car waiting to be picked up by the loco there at Vermont Yankee. And in the bottom, you can see the waste control specialist locomotive that has placed the rail car and cask on site. And this is the lifting operation, the transfer operation to the on-site tractor trailer skid configuration. So we have shipped 2 RWCs so far. You'll recall when I visited you last year, we were talking about starting the campaign in March. For various reasons, the campaign didn't start until the summer. We completed 2 deliveries to WCS. In between the deliveries, we had some delays. And as a result, the 3rd shipment would have been scheduled to deliver, RWCE would have been scheduled to deliver at WCS on Christmas Day, ironically. WCS decided that's not what they wanted for Christmas, so we've deferred the 3rd shipment until 2021, early 2021. That is going to be our first Category 1 shipment, so it's very high profile and important to everyone on this call, or at least the stakeholders that will be transiting. And I'll be transmitting an updated schedule to everyone. If you can click that link, Mitch, there is a video that kind of summarizes the highlights of some of the transportation activities. Hopefully that'll work.
Can you see the screen? Or is it still showing the PowerPoint?
I still see the PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's still showing the PowerPoint, and then don't forget when you switch over, Mitch, is there sound, Mike?
Yes, there is sound.
Okay, then make sure you enable that too, Mitch.
Can we hear the sound? Just wanted to make sure.
I cannot hear it.
I'm not sure how to do that. Sorry, 1 second. Share computer sound.
A key part of decommissioning a shutdown reactor site is efficiently segmenting, packaging, and transporting the reactor vessel and its internals to a permanent disposal site. Orano's experienced integrated decommissioning teams manage and perform this sequence of tasks with certainty and quality at every step. Segmentation is a precise, highly engineered process for efficiently maximizing the amount of low-level waste in each shielded transport container based on the piece's size and weight. Shielded boxes are used for larger sections, which are then filled with a grout-like material to complete the shielding and stabilization process. The reactor internals are sized for tight packing in rad waste containers for shipping inside Orano's shielded MP197HB transport cask. Let's follow it from Vermont Yankee to the disposal site. All waste departing Vermont Yankee is securely shipped on pre-approved routes qualified for the material and weight, which is at most about the same as the locomotive. Low-level waste shipments are a regular occurrence in the United States and conducted under established procedures. During shipment, the dedicated Orano transport crew monitors the transit and security and makes regular checks to ensure the load remains secured. Once the cask arrives at the waste control specialist's disposal site, it is transferred from the rail car onto a truck trailer for movement to the disposal cask transfer. The horizontal orientation of Orono's transport and the disposal casks avoids repositioning the cask and simplifies the entire transfer process. This efficient transfer limits dosage to the team and helps ensure seismic and operational safety. The team at WCS is experienced in all aspects of rad waste disposal, and their unique disposal site sits on a 600-foot thick ridge of near impermeable red bed clay, a secure final disposal. Once the rad waste container is removed, the MP-197HB transport cask and team return for another trip. For more than 50 years, there has never been an incident with casks transporting radioactive materials that has harmed either people or the environment. This strong safety culture and robust technology ensures the decommissioning of Vermont Yankee stays on track and continues to be a safe and secure process.
So that was a little bit of marketing, but I think it showed a lot more images of the activities and the operations that I could show with just pictures. What we've been doing and what we'll continue to do. Here's a couple pictures highlighting the activities at WCS. And the key thing, again, is that the RWC canister itself is then packaged into the concrete, the module that you see on the bottom right, which is really the confinement boundary for disposal. And then that is what is buried at WCS. And as I mentioned a year ago, when we were talking about the dry runs, the operation is essentially exactly the same operation that we do with dry storage canisters, DSCs, for used fuel at power plants all over the world. So it was really easy to adapt procedures for ourselves and then share procedures with WCS to replicate those same types of operations. Next slide. So lessons learned. This is just a quick summary of some of the key things that we've either challenges that we've dealt with or things that we've found interesting in actually executing the shipments. Anyone who's familiar with 49 CFR and DOT's hazardous material regulations knows that when you're talking about radioactive materials, there can sometimes be some ambiguity. And it's not as straightforward as other hazardous materials where you know what the material is and you know exactly how you need to handle it, package it, label it. When you have radioactive contents, depending on isotopes and activity and the nature of it, is it a contaminated object or is it a solution that's got homogeneous distribution of radioactive material? There's different ways that you could kind of go with how you organize the shipment, how you package it, how you apply marking, labeling. And so the licensee, in preparing the first shipment, and I believe this was a good faith effort on their part, they intended to use exception for bulk packaging that would allow them to, instead of using regular labels, they would use just UN number placards and radioactive placards on opposite sides. The reason I say this, I think, was good faith is because there really wasn't any advantage to be gained by doing this. It wasn't like, we were leaving out a bunch of work and made everything easier for ourselves or the licensee. What they were thinking was, on this huge cask that did not require placards because it was not a yellow 3 shipment, the dose rate coming off it, the TI was not high enough. It didn't require the vehicle to be placarded. The only thing we were going to have on this thing were the little radioactive labels. And so they made the argument that for hazard communication, it'd be better to organize things according to this exception. And I'll without trying to throw the licensee under the bus, I'll say that I wasn't comfortable with it, TN, we weren't comfortable with it. Our understanding of the regulations is when you got a type B package and your UN number and proper shipping name are type B, you don't get to call it a bulk packaging. Bulk packagings, you know, my opinion is bulk packagings are things like big tanks, big containers full of grain and things like that. Finally, we reached out with the FRA. The FRA has been really helpful with us. Mel Massaro, Jeff Moore, some folks that I know you guys have interfaced with before and have attended these meetings with us before, have been really helpful, proactive in trying to help us address issues like this that have come up, give their opinion, and they really strongly disagreed with this approach. And the most practical reason was, okay, inspectors that stop this shipment are not going to understand why it was done this way. There's no obvious way to indicate what exceptions being taken and why on the shipping papers. They're going to see information on the shipping papers like the TI and other things, and they're going to be looking for the yellow tube labels. So it was a practical argument that made sense, and we worked it out. Everybody, it was not argumentative, it was not combative discussion, and we changed the approach. Another challenge that we've dealt with, and I think this is something that I recall the FRA talking about at some of our meetings, or maybe it was more at the tribal meeting, but either way, it's something that they're aware of, and it's an issue that the industry is trying to deal with, but it's data loss in the electronic bill of lading system. And this actually came up on the first shipment that we did, where at the shipper site, we're interfacing with the short line, the New England Central Railroad, and we are generating the electric bill of lading with them. And then the way the system is supposed to work, there's an intra-line bill of lading that's generated every time it changes to a different rail company. So from NECR to CSX, from CSX to UP, and from UP to TXN, they're basically generating their own bill of lading for their own systems. And data gets lost, it gets transmuted, we had numbers that we didn't know where they came from, showed up on the CSX bill of lading. Things that we had put on the NECR bill of lading did not show up on the CSX bill of lading. And of course, the CSX is looking at the bill of lading saying, whoa, their hazmat people are looking and say, what, that can't be right. That doesn't match this or that. And we end up having to manage this through no fault of our own. And it's something that we've had to try to redundantly engage the downstream railroads to make sure, double check the information. And it's not straightforward. These internal documents, they don't generally share with original shippers and customers. So where it's just making us, I think the bottom line is we're having to pester the railroads a little bit to make sure we get this information and double check it before they find something that doesn't make sense and then react as if it's, you know, a problem with the shipping documentation. Next slide. Railroad routing changes. So similarly with the first shipment, the CSX out of St. Louis ended up using a different route than we were expecting based on the clearance. Now, as you'll recall, the Part 37 regulations, these were Category 2 shipments. The first 2 shipments that we've done were Category 2. So there's no strict requirement to have a predefined route like there would be for Category 1, where you've identified all the local law enforcement and everything and coordinated directly, specifically. But nevertheless, our expectation was that we had a predefined route based on the clearance. This is an oversized, overweight load, exceptional load, and the clearance performed by the railroads results in sort of confirming, yes, this cargo, high and wide, it's not really overweight for railroads, but high and wide cargo, it's a little bigger than your plate C, is going to be fine. It's authorized. We've cleared it for this route. So we found out indirectly after the fact that CSX had chosen to send it early. I think they were trying to optimize their shipping schedules, and they put it on a train, southbound train that took a different route than what was in our clearance. Now, the railroad's responsible for making sure that, you know, the load's not going to bump into anything. But this perturbed us a little bit because it, again, reflects that we just don't have a lot of direct control over the railroads. The regulations we're trying to implement don't directly impact the railroads. So they're almost respecting these regulations sort of as a favor to the customer. The NRC doesn't regulate them. And we ended up doing some extra work with Arkansas. Arkansas is one of the states who's been very actively engaged in this campaign, because they're really looking at it as an exercise practice for future used fuel shipping campaigns. And so they're really trying to test all their systems. Illinois has been very actively engaged with this campaign. But I'll show you on the next slide. Actually, Mitch, if you don't mind, jump down. Our planned route was Route A in black. The way the train ended up going was Route B, which you can see goes, we call it a southerly route down through Pine Bluff instead of through Little Rock. And Arkansas was, for lack of a better word, upset with this, because they had really reached out to themselves, organized conference calls with the local law enforcement agencies all along that Route A, and then come to find out in real time, no, actually we're going to be going down Route B. And so that, you know, threw them for a loop as well as us. And we ended up revising, generating a new map kind of on the fly, double checking local law enforcement, identifying local law enforcement along that route, and trying to help them put the word out just to give them a heads up of what was coming, all within a couple days' time. So we reached out to CSX and tried to understand why this ended up happening. We didn't get great explanation other than they've sort of replanned their operations, and for the near future, all these shipments should be going on this Route B. So we're revising our transport plan to include that option. We're going to do our best to confirm as strictly as we can prior to the Category 1 shipment that will be the route. And of course, we'll have the active monitoring of the Movement Control Center to follow up on that. The route did change a little bit in Missouri and a little bit in Texas as well. We'll be providing that updated information in a revised transport plan as well, ahead of the Category 1 shipment. Can you go back a slide, please, Mitch? Right, so the other challenge, the other big challenge we've had to deal with has been the fact that weather and other network disruptions, like you may have heard about the derailment and fire in Arizona. There was a bridge derailment and fire a couple months ago now, but it was in the middle of the summer, I think. I'm trying to remember the date exactly, but anyway, it was weeks before the first shipment, and ended up delaying the return of the empty cask from WCS because the UP was still diverting rail traffic and diverting resources to deal with the fallout from that bridge closure. And we ended up having a couple days delay with our empty cask sitting in Monahans, Texas. The TXN brought it out of WCS down to Monahans, and it should have left the day after, but it ended up being delayed 2 or 3 days because they just didn't have the resources and engine, loco, and other things. Similarly, the return of the empty shipment after delivery of the RWCB, so the second empty return, we ended up delaying the return about a week, a little more than a week, because of the impact of hurricane, forgive me, I forget which hurricane, but one hurricane that came right up through Louisiana didn't necessarily directly impact our route through Texas and Arkansas and up into Missouri, but created enough disruptions similar to the bridge accident where the railroads were telling us, look, if you ship now, odds are your cask is going to get stuck sitting and waiting as we deal with other things along the route. We had already made the decision that we were going to postpone the RWCE shipment until early 2021. So we had no pressure to get the cask back to BY, and we decided, okay, we'll just let it sit at WCS and wait until we get until we understand that the disruptions have cleared up. Next slide, please. Yeah, successes. So on the success side, we've had no significant delays due to transportation events or incidents. We have had some dwell time delays where the rail car has sat in yards maybe longer than we would have expected. Some of that has definitely been a result of COVID-19, where rail yards are understaffed and things aren't switching and moving as efficiently as they would otherwise. But we've really had no issue where the delivery to WCS, for example, was days behind schedule because of disruptions or incidents. It's been interesting monitoring the shipments. We've seen our estimated time of arrival fluctuate. It'll look like we're losing a day or two, and then we'll gain it back. And then the second one, we ended up delivering it a day or two early in the end. This, of course, it means that our average estimate has been pretty good. But it also means that we're going to have our work cut out for us, keeping tabs on the ETA and the estimated times of entry and departure from states for the Category 1 shipments. Because one of the requirements is we're going to have to, before this Category 1 shipment, we're going to have to inform every stakeholder, every state across the route when we estimate that we'll be entering the state and when we estimate we'll be exiting the state. And if that changes significantly, we'll have to provide updates. So there's going to be a little bit of work there, and it's maybe not as precise and a science as it would be for trucks. As I mentioned, the FRA has been really open and helpful with us. We've been periodically reaching out to them to double check things and eyeball things, and they've been very supportive. The way they behave, you love to see it from a regulator. Very helpful and constructive criticism when there has been criticism. The feedback that we've received from stakeholders on the GPS tracking system has been positive. We've gotten some requests from some for a little bit more utility in terms of tracking and reports, and I think that we've been able to meet those demands and requests. Not to put Kelly and Rodney on the spot, but I know Illinois is one in particular we've been working with a little bit. They've asked if they could have a little more functionality, and I think you've gotten that. You guys, if you want to jump in and speak to that, feel free.
Yeah, Mike, Kelly, you're exactly right. We greatly appreciate that too. So, and just a general comment on the whole shipping campaign. You know, your outreach and the work you've done to work with states on these, Cat 2 shipments is above and beyond, but we do appreciate it. And it does allow us to, like you said, use these shipments as a surrogate to test our procedures. So, your help and your staff's help has been great. And I'll say the only thing that we do have a concern with, and you mentioned earlier, is the dwell times within the yard in East St. Louis area. when it comes time for that Cat 1. So we plan on reaching out, talking with you and your staff, as well as working through our Illinois Commerce Commission, FRA, and the railroad and the utility to get this all kind of hammered out prior to that. But no,
Yes.
You guys have been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And yes, ahead of the Category 1 shipment, which I can say is planned for end of January, beginning of February timeframe. We have committed. We're going to organize stakeholder conference calls with each of the state's governors, designees, and other personnel as applicable to. We'll go over some of this again, and we'll go over the planning for the Category 1 shipment. The other success, not to jinx it, but so far for the first 2 deliveries, WCS has knocked it out of the park. They received the cask, they unloaded the cask, they processed the canister and inserted it into the MCC, and they had the cask turned around and ready to go each time in 3 days. It was like 1 day for the reception and unloading, 1 day for the insertion in the MCC, and then the next day they had the cask ready to go and turned around, which beat our 5-day estimate by obviously by 2 days. And it's just been really, really good. Ahead of the first shipment, WCS was really trying to set the bar low and saying, well, it might take maybe, give us 7 to 10 days maybe, because, this is all new system. And we did dry runs with them. We also did some refresher training because it ended up being almost a year later after the dry run that we did. But they really, like I said, they knocked it out of the park. Next slide. So that's all the comments and information that I had prepared. I'm certainly available to answer questions. I do have a hard stop at 1 o'clock in 20 minutes though. So if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to respond.
Well, thank you, Mike, for your time. I actually have a question. Can you, I kind of remember us talking about this the last time, but can you kind of review this tracking system that you're using? You mentioned it was GPS, but can you give us a little more information on that?
Sure. It's our own purchased hardware. It's off-the-shelf hardware. We have 2 GPS transponders installed on the rail car, on the skid actually. And then through we're working with, it's a private company that provides the web-based software that we control as the licensee, the license holder of the software. So we're an administrator for that, and Jay Thomas, our director of transportation, has created credentials for each state's governor's designee, tribe, Seneca tribe, and then if there's been a request to add anyone else so they have their own personal access, we've provided that as well. The software is pretty powerful, and depending on what bells and whistles you put on the transponders, you can get a lot of information to sort of track temperature sensitive shipments or fragile shipments, sensitive shipments that if you want to, you can have accelerometers, things like that. We don't have any of that, those bells and whistles, but you can then produce reports that like Kelly and Rodney requested and alluded to, that you can set up geofencing sort of alerts when the load is passing a certain point to tell you, for example, hey, it's this close now to the border with Illinois, or it's exited Illinois, things like that. So it's a pretty powerful tool. It's what we're going to be using to implement the Movement Control Center responsibility of independently tracking the movement of the train. That being said, what we're doing is redundant of what railroads do themselves. But again, the nature of the railroads is it was not clear how we could get them to commit to having someone keeping eyes on this one load as opposed to monitoring their whole network the way they do. This is one of the challenging spots with the NRC's regulations. If you look at the Part 37 regulations in the transportation section, when they talk about rail transport, they really almost assume that the railroad will do this. The Railroad Control Center, RCC, it's in there, will do all of this. Well, yeah, they're physically capable of doing that, but that's not necessarily a service that they sell. So the actual nuts and bolts of it means the licensee or commissioner like ourselves who's organizing the transport really has to set up some redundant capability from what the railroad has.
Thank you. Lisa, do we have time for any more questions or do we need to move on? I know we have like the next.
I think if anybody has additional questions, we could entertain one or two perhaps. I think your observation, Tiffany, go ahead and make that about the railroads changing the route.
I privately messaged Lisa, excuse me, while you were talking, but actually I have a question first and then I'll make that comment. You guys, if I recall correctly, your shipments are not dedicated trains. You're part of the regular shipments, correct? You're just like adding you're onto a regular.
That is correct, and you saw that pretty clearly in the video. That that train coming out of Vermont had the two locomotives, one car, and then the cask, and then a whole line of cars behind it. We're moving this as regular merchandise cargo.
So I think that kind of leads, one of the comments I made to Lisa is that, you know, one of my concerns about future RAD shipments is some of what you're hearing and experiencing with the railroads, that, you know, they can change the route that you proposed. And how is that going to work for states that are trying to identify how, especially, you know, I understand your stuff is not nearly anything like spent nuclear fuel, but just looking at it as a holistic issue with the railroads being a private entity and how little say somebody from outside of there has, how do we ensure as states that the rail shipments that they choose to do for spent nuclear fuel is the ones they take? Because we're planning on training along those routes to make sure that if something does, we have that ability to respond.
Right. So I'm obviously not a railroad representative. I can't speak for them, but what I can speak to is some things that I know that sort of constrain that behavior or that potential. The used fuel shipments will be dedicated trains. There's a couple things that get you there indirectly. But if, for example, if you're committed to using AS 2043 compliant rail cars, you will be in a dedicated train because the standard says all the cars in the train have to meet the standard. There's also AAR operating procedures and manuals that get you into direct dedicated train space. So when you have a dedicated train, you have more direct control over that, and the railroad treats it separately than their merchandise freight. So it's hard to say. We don't have a stick to control the way the railroads will operate, but the constraints that naturally end up being imposed on the used fuel shipments will help mitigate that risk. The other thing I would say is that when you're talking about the railroads choosing different routes, not to be glib, but it's not like there's an infinite number of routes that are crossing any given territory. And what it might mean is that we all have to do a little more work to prepare and say, okay, this should be the normal route, but if something goes haywire, this is the way it could go. And I think I want to suggest that from a physical protection and security point of view, it's probably good to do that anyway, because what happens if there's a disruption on the one line and we need to keep moving? We're going to take the alternate route. And it's probably something that needs to be incorporated into planning and preparation to address those sorts of possibilities. That if there's an event that, if there's a derailment on Route A through Arkansas and Little Rock, and we are aware of it before we get down there, then we can either see it, UP could divert to Route B or back up and go to Route B. And then if we've identified that route and pre-planned sufficiently, those guys along that route maybe are already aware that that could be a possibility.
All right, we have just one more brief question before moving on to the reports from our tribal and regional partners. This comes from Greg Gothard, who asks, can you speak to any foreseeable challenges if a state or jurisdiction chooses to escort this sort of shipment? Would a dedicated train be necessary for this?
So this is something that has come up preliminarily already with the fact that the last RWC that we're planning to ship, which is now scheduled in the late summer, early fall of 2021, is going to be a higher route control quantity. Several states have state regulations that I'll say mandate that that escorts are provided for higher route control quantity shipments. How is that actually going to work? We haven't figured it out yet. We're not going to provide, or the railroads, I'll suggest, will not provide a caboose or something on the end of their train that's going to facilitate state police or other entities getting on and riding along with the train. Squad cars could follow the route as closely as possible. I mean, if you want to get way outside the box, we could be talking about drones, helicopters. I don't know. That's another subject that we have to engage the states that have this requirement. I think Kelly and Rodney, I think Illinois is one of them, to understand exactly how they think they can implement this requirement and do our best to work with them. I don't foresee it being feasible for the states to drive the shipment to be by dedicated train. I don't see how a legal mechanism, how that would work. That would be a result. But our intention is to be as flexible and accommodating as possible to satisfy the state's requirements and the stakeholder needs, in good faith.
Okay, I know we're running a little bit behind, so Mike, I will thank you for all your time and coming back and joining us again today. It was very helpful and informative. I know Mitch mentioned earlier, but as a state that you've been traveling through, we do appreciate the communication and how much you've worked back and forth with our staff.
Thank you for having me. I honestly enjoy working with everybody, and I think it's just a better way to do business, to make sure we can try to get everybody on the same page and earn support as opposed to argue about things.
I also appreciate hearing the perspective of somebody who's actually dealing with the railroads right now, doing shipments, versus everything that we tend to hear in meetings, which is, oh, this is how it will work, or theoretically, and getting that actual, boots on the ground experience is very helpful.
Yep.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next, we will move into the reports from the tribal and regional partners. As everyone knows, we often build in time to hear from counterparts from the other regions, as well as TrimTech, or the Tribal Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee. We have 25 minutes for this, and I will start with TrimTech, actually, which Heather is going to give us that update today.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm giving the update for Ron Johnson, who was giving the update for Richard, so I'm like third choice here. But anyway, we've got a few things. We had a virtual meeting, like most of you all, in September that highlighted the CSG Midwest Regional Tribal Engagement Working Group. And then also we had a good roundtable discussion with the other SRGs regarding the private shipments. And then lastly, we talked about the environmental impact statements for the 2 interim storage facilities. And related to those environmental impact statements, we submitted comments to the NRC on the 2 impact statements. Let's see, we also, last month we had safeguards training, NRC safeguards information training, and this is a requirement for any of the tribes wishing to be part of the advanced notification program. So that's a must have, and that was a successful training. And we've also, TrimTech has also hired Chip Cameron. He's a former NRC Assistant General Counsel to work on a couple of technical papers, one being a comparison between shipments under Section 180C of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and private shipments. Maybe similar to the tabletop that you all did last year. That's kind of a jumping off point. So hopefully that's one that we're going to be presenting at Waste Management. And then also Chip is going to be doing an analysis of the revised regulations for the National Environmental Policy Act, and to see what changes are going to be implemented and how that affects consultation and coordination with tribes. And that's all we got. We have a meeting coming up in January and hope you all are there.
As Heather, I'm assuming it's virtual.
Yep.
I figured it was.
Do you have dates yet, Heather?
Yeah, let's see. It's, if Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it is January 21st. Because we usually do the Netwick meeting and the, yeah, it's January 21st. And then on the 19th, we'll have the Netwick meeting. We usually do those together. So there'll be a break in between the 2 meetings. So yeah, virtual, at a virtual location near you.
All right, thank you, Heather. If anybody has any questions for Heather for TrimTech? I don't see any in the chat. Oh, Lisa does. I love her little hand.
That's fine.
That's my clapping.
Forgot.
That's my clapping. I'm clapping for Heather.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Excuse me. I don't zoom enough. All right. Mr. Wells, you're up.
Thank you, Tiffany. Just a couple of comments for the South. We will also be having our virtual, I call it the virtual winter event. Sounds like a Ice Capades title or something, but we'll be looking at the first week of December. I just heard back from my speakers. We'll probably choose the 3rd, December 3rd. So I'll send something out on that. The theme I'm going for, it'll be like you guys are doing. I'm going to split it and have 2 events, both being about, from 60 to 90 minutes a piece. But this first one, the theme will be training, just looking at how states and how the agencies that offer training are conducting it during this time frame. So either we'll learn some things or find new resources to deliver training. Second thing I wanted to mention, we'll be doing a series of orientation calls to some of our member states. Either, we've had either new members appointed or people move on to different positions, or agency reorganization, or change of administration. And so we have, a lot of mix up. And so sometimes our program managers, I guess when I say program, I'm referring to the WIP program, and committee members, sometimes they're the same people, sometimes not. So this will give us a good opportunity just to brief them and their leadership on their roles within the committee or as a program manager. We submitted comments for draft DOE Order 460.2B. I think it was well received overall. Not a great deal of comments, but we compiled those and submitted those yesterday. We continue to be active in the topic groups, like or working groups like the rail routing working group, and to work with our states. A lot of our states conduct the the nuclear power plant full ingestion pathway exercises, and we invoke SIMRAP and our mutual aid agreement and participate in those exercises as well. Majority of our time has been spent, we're the host for the 2021 NTSF meeting in Dallas, Texas, and so that's probably where the majority of our time has been spent. I'd like to thank the members who are a part of the Agenda Development Committee for helping us shape this meeting into order. And so we'll begin just paring down the agenda and assigning some people to specific breakout sessions and topics. And so look for more information about that on our next call, which is next call of the Planning Committee, which is November 20th. Last thing I wanted to add was I'm from the great state of Georgia, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen on the news a lot of information about Georgia flipping, during this presidential administration. So I decided, Lisa, to use this as inspiration. I'm going to attempt to flip one of the Midwest states to the SSEB. And Lisa knows I've had lots of success in the past. I somewhat made inroads in Ohio and Indiana. So now I have my eyes on Mrs. Chairperson herself, Tiffany Drake, in the state of Missouri, to bring them back to SSEB. And, Tiffany, we have, we send our chair people on full paid vacations, lots of perks that Lisa hadn't offered. If we can't get you, we'll get Grandpa Kelly Horn from Illinois.
Hey, you can have Tiffany, but we keep Missouri.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. For those of you that don't know it, once upon a time, well before me, apparently we did join the Southern States Energy Board for a period of time as Missouri. It's my understanding it was due to the representative from Missouri liking the golfing locations that Southern States went to. So I am not a golfer, so that doesn't work so well for me.
It's the last time we invite Chris to give comments on our meetings.
Does anybody have any questions for Chris? Other than Kelly offering me up?
I have a question. What's on the hat, Chris?
Yeah.
Really?
The best, worst team in the NFL.
I was about to say, my team's 8-0, so,
Okay, Chris.
I still hold it against them that they
flipping
blew it with the Patriots.
True.
Chris, who are you offering in exchange for a state going to the SSCB?
Oh,
Yeah, do we get Kentucky or something? Yeah, this is a 1-for-1.
How about Florida?
Can we have Tennessee?
You could have meetings in Florida.
True. Don't you have Virgin Islands in your group?
That too, yeah, and Puerto Rico.
There you go. Puerto Rico. Okay.
Deal.
All right, we will leave Chris with his offers to take other people and move on to Melanie with the Western Interstate Energy Board and Westerners Governors Association.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from sunny, warm-ish Denver, no longer snowing. So the High-Level Radioactive Waste Committee had their virtual meeting a couple weeks ago, and we had a presentation from Randall Granis from Southern California Edison on their San Onofre spent nuclear fuel storage inspection and repair program. That was a pretty interesting presentation. And also had a good state roundtable. And we elected new leadership. So we have Tammy Ottmer from Colorado as the chair, and we have Landry Austin from Idaho as the vice chair. So I will not be holding another meeting, I don't believe, unless my committee members express the desire for us to cover some more topics. So I'll be deviating a bit from what seems to be the typical virtual meeting experience to split it in half. That's the only meeting I'm planning on having in the fall. Other high-level radioactive waste committee activities, we did submit comments on the draft environmental impact statements for both Holtec and Interim Storage Partners consolidated interim storage facility applications. And those are, well, I've posted the ones for Holtec on the Weeb website. I have not yet gotten the ISP ones posted yet, but they will be available shortly if anyone is interested, or I'm certainly happy to send them along. Mostly focused on encouraging the NRC to build up their transportation component of those EISs to be a little more robust. We have also proposed some new work for the committee in 2021. One project will be a survey of Western states' hazmat regulations. This will be kind of jumping off work that we did, I believe, in 2017 in response to an information request from DOE asking for those regulatory regimes. So kind of updating that and making it a little more useful for the Western states and also for other people who are interested in having kind of a full survey of what those regimes look like. And we will also be doing a survey of the updated agreements that a lot of the states, the Western states in particular, have renegotiated their agreements with the Department of Energy and in some cases the Environmental Protection Agency to process waste, remove waste, you know, all of the associated agreements that the states have had with the federal government in relation to the national lab sites. So have a survey of the updated agreements and what those kind of waste movement or processing or removal deadlines look like. So it'll keep us busy next year. Also, as many of you know, WGA and Weeb are working to transition management of the WIP tag from WGA to Weeb. So WGA's cooperative agreement with DOE to manage that group ends next year. So our hope is that we can take advantage of that natural end to have Weeb actually have a cooperative agreement with DOE to manage the WIP tag. So that would see kind of the exit of the Western Governors Association from this particular policy space. This is something that I've actually been interested in doing for a while because all of the other state regional groups, you know, have management of both of their committees within one organization, and structurally it makes a lot of sense for our organizations, and I think it also just streamlines everything for the two groups who have such similar leadership or similar composition and, you know, are focused on such a really rather narrow topic area. So far so good. We're working with DOE and also the states to put all of those transition items into place. So I will go ahead and give the WIP tag update as well as if I were the Western Governors Association. We are working right now through our biennial program evaluation. So we are taking each section of the program implementation guide and having discussion with the Western state members about kind of how they build their program, you know, where are they getting money for equipment, you know, kind of these little nitty-gritty things to, you know, stimulate discussion and also so that the states can get ideas about different things they can do with their program. And it might be that we will be amending the PIG in regards to this, this discussion, but it's not at all firm yet. It's a pretty well-established document, so we shall see. Also, there was a WIP route that was reopened through California and Nevada for Lawrence Livermore shipments. That campaign, as I understand, is not finished, but they are not going to be shipping anymore this year. So I think they're going to continue that in the spring, although no one's quite entirely sure when that will happen. So that was kind of an interesting thing to see happen. And I believe that's all I have from the West.
Thanks, Melanie. I would be interested to see the comments that you all made because I participated in your meeting the other week and you made some points of the comments that you submitted for the EISs. So if you have an opportunity to send those our way or however, or just send me.
Happy to do it.
I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else have any questions for Melanie? Okay. Seeing as there's none and we're all running behind a little bit. Next, for the CSG Eastern Regional Conference, Vina Kubi, it's all you.
Hi, Tiffany. So everyone, it's finally nice to see you all again. I know even though we are not there in person, it's going to be another virtual meeting again. So I'll just say hi to everyone because he's still recovering from his shoulder surgery. So I'll be providing an update. Northeast fall meeting was also held via Zoom. It's going to be in 2 different sessions. The first one was held on October 29th, and the second one is going to be scheduled for sometime in December. I don't have a date yet. Once I get the date, we'll be sending out the dates for you. At the meeting, we had several presentations, and a few of them were Erica from DOE provided an overview on the draft DOE order. And since all the comments were due today, all the states put together our comments and we sent it out to them. A status update was provided for all 3 Yankee plants in New England, which are right now all at Nispesi only site. And that was one of the major things that we were discussing during the meetings. And then the other path thing that we discussed was a panel consisting of representatives from the State of New York, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Seneca Nation of Indians. They provided like an overview of their success and lesson learned from their Canadian shipment campaign, where they emphasized that communication between the state and the tribes and the shipping companies was really a key to their success. And then having an actual cask, which they could, have it like a show and tell along the routes, helped the local government address all their concerns. And TEP training was a successful path too. And the other thing that they kind of mentioned was, the cooperation between the states when they were doing the vehicle inspection was really good. The Northeast will be hosting the 2022 NTSF annual meeting. Hopefully it's going to be in person and we won't be doing another virtual meeting. We don't have the location. Actually, we have identified the location in the hotels, but the information will be discussed in the next planning committee meeting. And that's all I have for the Northeast group.
Thank you, Vina. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I can happily say we have now reached the point of at least our 5-minute break. So thank you from everybody who's given their updates. Again, turn off your microphones, turn off your cameras for the 5-minute break, and then we'll be back and get to hear about the rail incident that happened in Kelly's shop fire at our recent rail routing ad hoc working group. So he's back for his encore performance with all of us. So without further ado, Kelly has about 25 minutes to tell us all about the rail car fire that he had.
All right, well, thank you, Tiffany. And I will try to, I'm gonna boil about 2 months worth of work down into 20 minutes. And I probably will be jumping out of time sequence a little bit. So if that confuses anybody, I apologize ahead of time. Again, we're looking at about 50 days worth of work being boiled down into 20 minutes. So please, if you do have questions, you can just ask Mitch, jump in anytime and just stop me and we will try to answer it. If not, I'll be more than happy to answer it at the end here. So I am going to speak about a rail car fire that did take place on June 4th, 2020 in Bedford Park, Illinois. Just to try to orientate everybody real quick to where Bedford Park is. If we see the greater Chicagoland area, Bedford Park is a suburb in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. Lies just south of I-55 and wedged in between I-55 and I-90. For those of you that have ever been out to Argonne National Laboratory, if you see my cursor out here just at the 355 marker, Argonne sits right here. Now, as we drill in to Bedford Park, you can see that Bedford Park is a highly residential area, and it does have multiple commercial and residential activities taking place. Anybody that has ever flown into Chicago's Midway sits right here, and the Belt Railway Company where the fire took place is right down here. And you can see that is, again, surrounded by a lot of commercial structure. The Belt Railway Company is the largest switching yard in the United States. It is owned by the BNSF, Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and the UP. So it is a conglomerate company owned by the major railroads in the United States. And it's not, I don't think it's the largest humping yard, but it is one of the largest hump yards in the nation. So I will again point out this road over here where it says 50, that is Cicero Avenue. And that's going to be an important point and location for part of my discussion coming up. All right, so on June 4th at approximately 6:30 a.m., our agency, Illinois Emergency Management Agency Division of Nuclear Safety, was notified. Actually, we were notified by the State of Texas Radiation Protection Program. They were notified, I would imagine, by WCS that a shipment that was en route from Wampum, Pennsylvania, I could say here, I could give this presentation a lot of times and I just love saying Wampum, but it was en route from Wampum, Pennsylvania to WCS in Texas. And the shipper of record was Aileron Nuclear Services. Just as a point of reference, Aileron Nuclear Services, they do many radiological services. They are a multifaceted company. And one of the services that they provide is low-level waste processing. So this gondola that you see right here is a gondola full of low-level waste that was processed and sent for disposal out of Aileron Nuclear. So one of the issues that we had at the point of at about 6:30 a.m. on June 4th was that the State of Texas Radiation Protection Program was telling our duty officer who took the call, Gary Forsey, they were informing Mr. Forsey that, hey, just want to let you know, a courtesy call, that there is a rail car that's on fire in Bedford Park at the Belt Railway Company. It contains residual, I think they said residue. It has residue. No real big deal. So at that point in time, when Gary got the phone, he called and was debriefing me. He was talking about, hey, according to the state of Texas, we have a rail car that's on fire. Probably an empty car, the way they're talking. Well, about that time, my cell starts blowing up with pictures coming in from our Chicago staff, who was getting information off of Facebook. And these pictures were coming in and they were actually in conflict. The information was in conflict with the information being provided to the agency. So to squeeze this orange a little bit, we decided to spin up our response personnel and send personnel to the scene immediately. So this at point in time, we're looking at almost 5 a.m. here on June 4th. So don't have a whole lot of pictures to kind of describe what was taking place between 1 a.m. when the fire was starting to be recognized and 5 to 6 a.m. So what I'm going to kind of do is kind of orient the listener to where I'm at here. So this picture was taken from the video surveillance in the control tower that sits on top of the hump in the yard. So for those who may not know what a hump is, it's really just it's a hill basically in a yard that allows gravity to take the rail car down the hill. The control tower can then use the switch to determine which rail line which rail is going to go on to create a new consist. So about 2:30 a.m. in the morning on June 4th, rail yard personnel noticed that they had a fire starting up in one of the rail cars. At that point in time, they didn't know which rail car it was. It was dark. So nonetheless, they went ahead and called Bedford Park Fire and Hazmat. If you see here on this end facing us, closest to us, where my cursor is, they were able to hook power up to this part of the consist. They decoupled it down here at this coil car, and they were able to pull this part of the consist out. They took the consist and pulled it over into part of the yard that was kind of isolated and away from the rest of the cars. About that point in time, Bedford Park Hazmat shows up and starts trying to apply water to the fire. Unfortunately, because of where it was in the rail yard, the fire department was unable to hook up to a hydrant, so they were just trying to pump directly out of the car, out of the fire truck. I apologize. they didn't have a whole lot of luck suppressing the fire with water because they couldn't get the water they couldn't shoot the water far enough over to put the fire out. However, the fire started to dwindle out shortly thereafter. So Bedford Park, as soon as the fire looked like it was going out, Bedford Park Hazmat left with the understanding that if anything needed, that they would be on call by the Belt Railway Company. So you're going to hear a theme throughout this conversation that this fire was at best kind of schizophrenic in the fact that the fire would start up and then go out, start up and then go out. So early in the morning of June 4th, once the fire started to rekindle again, the decision was made by Belt Railway Company and their response personnel, on-site response personnel, that they were going to try and smother the fire. So they got on-site soil from a soil pile and started using the end loader, as you see here, to put on top of the rail car in hopes of smothering the fire and suppressing the oxygen content within the car. If you look at this rail car here, you can see this discoloration of the rail car, and that's the area where the fire started, where it got its hottest. At about this point in time, the first measurement had the surface of the rail car over 700 degrees. And you can see that these were lidded gondolas, and this is part of the lid here that is melted off. So at this point in time, everybody's feeling kind of comfortable that the fire is probably going to be able to be suppressed due to the added soil to the rail car. However, at this point in time, we're still unsure of what the contents of the rail car are. And so, as the crews are putting out the fire, we're working in the background trying to get a hold of either WCS or Allied Nuclear to provide us with the manifest. So now we're about 10 a.m. on June 4th. Again, you can see that the soil has been applied to the top of the rail car. If you look down here, you can see that it's still wanting to smolder again. Here is one of our health physicists performing a gamma dose rate survey. So at this point in time, our response personnel are on site. We're taking multiple radiation measurements. We're doing gamma dose rate surveys. We're doing contamination surveys, and we're starting to set up a perimeter air monitoring network to try to determine whether any radioactive material, any source of radioactive material is being volatilized with the fire and coming out. I mentioned earlier Cicero Avenue sits back here. So this actually became our nearest receptor. So we started doing dose modeling using Rascal, and anybody who has ever done dose modeling with Rascal. Rascal stands for Radiological Assessment System for Consequence Analysis. A lot of entities use it for dose assessment with power plant operations. However, it can be used in other methods. And one of the nice things that we learned about Rascal is that it does have an actual fire component built within the model. So we were able to utilize that. And we use if you snapped a line from the end of the rail car over here to Cicero Avenue, that's about, I think it's like 530 or 550 feet. And there is a public walkway over Cicero Avenue. So that was going to be our nearest receptor. So we started modeling, and our predictive model showed that a person who was standing at that site for 3 to 5 hours would receive less than 1 millirem. And that was using a very conservative source term. And we'll talk about the source term here in a second, but as you see the manifest, there wasn't a whole lot of activity within this rail car. There's only a little over 4 millicuries of activity. But we're dealing with, cobalt 60, cesium 137, 134, and uranium 234 and 235. Excuse me. So again, our dose assessment came up that if we determined that during this fire that had already, taken place, that we lost half of our source term, a person standing down at Cicero Avenue would receive very, very little dose whatsoever. And if you can point out here's a second rail car. If we went back to, there's 2 rail cars. Here's one rail car that was on fire of low level waste, and here's the second rail car of low level waste. So when they decoupled and segregated it, they finally got the rail car separated and isolate this car. So here's the second car, rail car down here. So it's at this point in time that we're probably 10:30 a.m. and Aileron was able to supply the agency with a low level waste manifest. So during our conversations with Aileron, they started talking about the contents of, what was in the actual rail car itself, and come to find out that besides other dry active waste, wood pallets and contaminated objects, that there was Zerk alloy cladding. So what actually had happened here was that Aileron had a contract years ago with a company that was producing fresh fuel. The fuel pellets were loaded within the Zerk cladding. The Zerk cladding was subject to tech spec. The Zerk cladding failed the tech spec, so that could not be used in a power plant operation. So the company contracted with Aileron to cut open the Zerk alloy, remove the fuel pellets, and then there was an attempt to decontaminate the Zerk alloy itself. Zerk alloy was never decontaminated. There was issues with the parent company who owned the alloy. So Aileron ended up being kind of a quasi owner of the Zerk alloy, and they were finally decided to clean house and ship it off to WCS for disposal. Why is that important? Well, Zerk alloy, when it's in its cladding form, is not pyrophoric. However, Zerk alloy, when it is in fine granular dust and small pieces, can be pyrophoric. So now the question becomes, do we have a fire that is a zirconium fire that's gone pyrophoric? We quickly decided probably not, because if it was a pyrophoric Zerk alloy fire, it would have melted through the rail car itself. So, now we're still trying to figure out why do we have a fire? What caused the fire? One of the early theories that Aileron had, maybe trying to shift blame a little bit, was, if you see this where I'm running my cursor, this do not hump. They were very forthright in saying that there was a lot of Zerk alloy within the gondola. However, there was other metals in there as well. And they said that maybe, because the do not hump is on the side of the rail car, that it was improperly humped, and the humping process created some friction or caused a spark and caught either some of the dry active waste on fire, or potentially, one theory was that some of the wood and other dry active waste may have been decaying. We did have, again, it was a lidded gondola. There may have been some head gas captured within the gondola, and a spark caught the gas on fire and started a fire. So at this point in time, we really don't know. What we do know is that we still have an issue within the rail car, and that the rail car is, the fire is starting to generate more heat. And so now we're deciding, well, what are we going to do to try to mitigate the fire within the rail car? So early in the afternoon of June 4th, it was decided to try and bring in a dewar of liquid nitrogen and inject the liquid nitrogen into the rail car itself, with the theory being we were going to try and displace the oxygen within the voids of the rail car with the liquid nitrogen. So everybody agreed upon that. One of our issues at that point in time, at the agency was that we did not want this to take place until we had a sufficient amount of air monitoring going on, because if you're going to displace something, whatever you displace is going to go somewhere. So we wanted to ensure if it did go airborne that we're able to determine any concentrations leaving the site, or any concentrations to any occupational dose to workers. So I'm going to kind of pause here for a second and talk about the second rail car. So now, you know, as we're dealing with the first rail car and saying, well, we have a Zerk issue going on, we have a fire, what's in this second rail car? So Aileron was quickly able to produce the manifest for this car and provide the build sheet, and both documents suggested that there were no Zerk alloy in this car. However, we did have issues. We wanted to ensure before this car got moved anywhere that there was no contamination. So we did multiple contamination surveys, you know, by way of smears, counted smears on site, and then brought those smears back to our radiochemistry laboratory for further analysis. It was also at this point in time that conversation started about, I'm going to apologize because I'm going to go back a little bit here. Where did these cars go? So we have these cars were within the direct line of the fire, you know, the smoke plume. We were able to easily assess the coil car, but we didn't know where these cars went. So on the morning of June 5th, we all had Aileron, our agency, Belt Railway Company, FRA, Illinois Commerce Commission, had a conference call, and one of the things was decided was that we needed to track down where these other cars went. Belt Railway was able to determine that the cars did indeed leave the yard, but luckily enough, they were only a few miles away in a UP yard in South Holland, Illinois. So Illinois Commerce Commission and IEMA went down to that facility and did contamination surveys of those cars. Again, no contamination above any regulatory limits were identified. So as we go back, I apologize, as we go back to the rail car in question, so the liquid nitrogen worked for a while. It took us through the next morning with no fire. However, about 5, 6 a.m. the next morning, the fire did start to rekindle. So you see here, the decision was made to remove the soil that was once put on the rail car in attempts to smother the oxygen and try to replace that with sand. The theory being that the sand would be placed on top of the rail car, and then the inloader could physically manipulate the rail car to get the sand to settle down into the voids and try again, one, to displace the oxygen and smother the fire. That did work for a while. It started bringing the temperatures down. Matter of fact, so now we're June 5th, and we're in the PM of June 5th, so in the afternoon, evening of June 5th, which was a Friday. The decision was made to let the sand and set within the rail car and monitor the ambient rail car temperatures over the next 48 hours. So the Belt Railway Company's contractor physically set with the rail car 24/7, and on every hour of the hour they got out and took a surface temperature reading of the rail car, and lo and behold, over the next 48 hours, temperature started coming down and got down to approximately 200 degrees Fahrenheit by Monday. So moving into Monday, Aileron Nuclear, now we're really kind of phasing out of a response portion of the process here and really kind of moving into a recovery phase. So Aileron Nuclear had a plan to remove the load, the contents of the load. But before that happened, they needed to come in under reciprocity underneath their agreement state license. Aileron is a radioactive materials licensee of the state of Pennsylvania. So our agency granted Aileron Nuclear reciprocity under that license to come in, provided that they provided our agency with a very detailed work plan and a mitigation process for how they're going to offload the material. So the process really was they brought in a bunch of IP1 intermodals. These are top, you see here the top top lid lifting. So they were going to meticulously start pulling out the contents of the rail car and putting it in here. So in order, again, one of our biggest fears was once they offloaded the material into these IP1s, that the fire was going to start up again. So what they did is they would layer the intermodal with sand, bring over some contents, put the contents in the intermodal, layer it with sand, and just keep, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So that took place over the next few days. As you can see here, as they started getting down into the lower contents of the rail car, the fire, as soon as the inloader would pull a piece of the load away, oxygen would hit the heat source and cause the fire to start up again. So they had continual water suppression the whole time. This would eventually cause another low-level waste issue that we'll talk about here shortly. So now we're probably through week 1, and this process, Aileron told us early on, yeah, we probably have this done in 6 to 8 days. So from June, let's see, I've been June 7th or 8th, they told us 6 to 8 days. They did not leave the site until the end of July. Here is a better view of the Zurich alloy cladding. As you can see, I think Jeff Moore correctly characterized this as just a dumpster fire. When they loaded, when Aileron loaded this rail car, there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to how they loaded it. They just threw material in, commingled it with dry active waste, and had complete disregard for any potential sparking or fire mechanism. So their load securement, you can say, was pretty poor. Here's an aerial view that the Belt Railway Company took with their drone. You can see early on it was anticipated that they were looking at using probably upwards of 20 of these IP1s. They ended up loading and shipping 42 IP1s to Toxco. WCS, where I mentioned earlier, WCS, the load was originally going to go there. WCS told Aileron Nuclear that they would not accept the material within this gondola. So Aileron found another taker, Toxco in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, so they would take it and dispose of it. So 42 of these gondolas were loaded and shipped to Toxco for disposal. So here, I mentioned earlier that the suppression, the water used for fire suppression caused another issue. So as the water made its way through the rail car and out the drain plugs, it took contamination with it. So there was some soil contamination. So Aileron had to remediate, and so they remediated to our decommissioning regulations for each radionuclide present. So that took place. We came back on top of that and did confirmatory surveys and sampling and submitted those to our radiochemistry laboratory for analysis. So here's just a picture of the intermodals coming in. Those are new intermodals. And here are the water totes that they use. They end up creating enough water to fill 7 of these totes. These totes were sent back to Aileron, and for their own, they decided they would process that water and send the waste off after processing. So the totes were sent back to Aileron. Everything else was sent off to Tennessee. So quick lessons learned. So when we compare what took place with this low radioactive waste rail car to a spent fuel shipment in Illinois, I think it goes without saying that the notification process and response would be completely different. One, because of the advance of notification. Illinois and all states affected would have prior knowledge of the shipment coming through. Plus, Illinois has a inspection escort program, so we would have been with this. If this is a rail car and something happened to it, we would have been with a rail car, at all times. So there really is a stark difference of how the notification process would take place. What was another really delightful thing to know is that ICC and IEMA do not work on a daily basis together. We do have our inroads and our regulatory overlaps. However, because of this incident, we became really good friends really quick, and we were able to integrate seamlessly, which was a nice thing to know, that if something of a much larger scale happened, that we assumed the same integration would take place. Our integration with the rail industry was fabulous. Sometimes the rail can be kind of hard to deal with. Belt Railway Company was far from that. They were very accepted of us being there. I don't want to say gracious hosts, but they were very, very easy to work with. Our interaction with sister state agencies, other agreement states, whether it be Pennsylvania, or our discussions with the state of Tennessee, where the waste is sent, was flawless and again integrated nicely. Our work for federal partners on June 5th, when we had our first conference call with all entities involved, I can't tell you how happy I was to hear Jeff and Mel's voices on the call. So these pre-existing relationships that are created through forums like the NTSF and the CSG Midwest and all the other regional groups, they really pay off when you need them. So it was nice to already have pre-established working relationships with the key players. Also, our radiological response knowledge was transferable. We do a lot of responses to portable gauges, lost sources. But it was nice to know that as we need to scale those that radiological response knowledge up, that is scalable and transferable. As I mentioned earlier, we were able to use a new application, use Rascal as a new application. And we did identify some issues. In March of 2020, the governor of Illinois sent all state workers home. And when that happened, our radiochemistry lab here in Springfield, we had to shutter it. And so at the time that the fire took place, the radiochemistry laboratory was still shuttered. For those who ever dealt with the radiochemistry laboratory in general, is that you just don't come in, flip a switch, and get everything up and running. It took us a week to get liquid nitrogen ordered and in for our gamma scintillated counters, our high purity, gamma scintillation counters. And then it takes the time to get those up and running and get the electronics cooled, and then everything had to be QA'd, QC'd. So those are one of the things that we're looking at now internally, is what can we do better to ensure that if we do have to go remote again, that we don't have to shutter the radiochemistry lab. And then we also had issues like some of our air monitoring equipment was run off batteries. We have SOGs that say that those air monitors will be pulled out monthly, evaluated. However, we don't run them for hours upon hours at a time. So some of the batteries had built up a memory. So we had some battery issues with trying to run our portable air monitoring systems. Another issue was that we actually have a calibration laboratory here on site, and those individuals were not in. So some of the instruments that we needed to rotate through and get calibrated quickly, we could not do that. So we had to find other means. And then we had some issues with what I would call regulatory shortfalls, and really this really boils down to trying to get cost reimbursement for the event from the shipper. So with that, I will say I think I came in under on my time. Any questions?
I don't hear any. Ooh, I need my video back on.
Kelly, this is Rick Moore.
All right.
wondering if you had any difficulty getting access for people to the rail yard, given the safety training that's generally been said to be required for railroad access to ship switch yards?
Yeah, so no, so all of our response staff, Rick, are, we're all to the technician level, the OSHA has Whopper technician level. So when we showed up on site, really the only thing we had to do was a quick, they did walk us through their safety. It was more like a tailgate type of safety overview. But we did fall underneath their safety protocol. So Belt Railway Company had the authority to shut us down at any point in time, and we completely agreed with that. So it was pretty seamless and flawless trying to integrate in, mainly because of how we're trained from a response level.
Okay, thank you. That's good lesson learned too.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll mark
Hey,
that.
Kelly, it's Heather Westra.
Hi, Heather.
How you doing? Good presentation. I'm just curious what the response was from the public.
Oh yeah, sure.
Whether or not there were any negative consequences to this. In other words, did the activist community take this incident and run with it, etc.?
Yeah, believe it or not, Heather, there was very little public interest generated. There was more political interest generated from, local congressmen and state representatives. However, we did not get hardly any inquiries from the general public. And that wasn't, this was out there on Facebook. And so, it wasn't like social media ignored it. It was out there. It just didn't, for whatever reason, whether COVID was the topic of the day and this kind of took a back seat to it. Not really sure, but yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of public outreach or, concern.
Well, looking at your photos, it looks like there are residences in the general vicinity.
Yeah. So if you see here, so there's some hotels back here. This is all industrial. This is not, this is off of Belt Railway Company's property. So this is commercial. Then you start getting into, it's still commercial, but hotels. And then beyond that, you can get back into residential areas. So yeah, I mean, like I said, the nearest receptor for a dose assessment was 550 feet away. So it wasn't a fairly populated area.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Kelly? Kelly, thank you so much for your presentation. I know that I appreciated it the first time, but even the second time you get to see some of the detail that you missed the first. So thank you very much for sharing that with all of us. Okay, everyone. Well, we are almost done. Oh, you're getting applause. Rick gave you applause, Kelly. There you go. First and foremost, the most important thing we still have to do is the election of the junior co-chair. And this person will serve starting immediately and become senior co-chair in 2022. The candidate for office, as Lisa mentioned yesterday, must be a member of the committee or their alternate. And again, that's only for the co-chair position. We're gonna be talking about some others in the future. So my first question is, are there any nominations for the co-chair position? And you can nominate yourself if you so choose. Very quiet group all of a sudden.
I think Rodney's on mute.
Yes, he is on mute.
Kelly, would you like to nominate somebody? Or Greg, since you guys have previously served? You can talk up the wonderful experiences you've had as committee co-chairs.
Well, it's a fun time had by all. You get to work with Tiffany, so I mean.
Thanks, Kelly.
Being Angela Leek or Paul Schmidt.
I heard that very, very faintly, Greg.
Yeah, it's because I'm wearing my headphones. I'm leaning Angela Leek or Paul Schmidt.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to have to decline. Retirement is looming in my near future.
I'll replace Paul Schmidt with Mike Snee.
So I also it would be interested in, I'm taking over CRCPD chair next year in May. So I just want to make sure that I can put the right effort in every spot. So I know it'll be junior co-chair, but I think I'd prefer to wait till I'm past chair, and then which will be early 2022. So.
Well, since I've avoided this for about 10 years, I guess I can't do it any longer. I will remember.
Hey, Mike, you lasted longer than me because I came on after you and got pinged before you did. So, okay, is there any other nominees since that one was so painful? Okay. Seeing there's only one, I need a motion to elect that individual as co-chair to serve as junior co-chair through 2022. Is there anyone to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Seconded.
Who seconded? Was that Paul?
James Rochilla from Nebraska.
Sorry, there's both of you are unmuted and I didn't catch it. It didn't highlight.
James Rochilla from Nebraska.
Okay, so James seconded. All those in favor of the motion to elect Mike Snee to the co-chair signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay.
Don't talk, Mike.
Yeah, don't jump, Mike. Well, congratulations, Mike. And we've been asked to stay on after the meeting ends so we can get a photo with all of our lovely backgrounds.
Okay.
And
thanks, everyone.
Thank
all
you,
right,
Mike.
congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, Lisa, you're up next with activities and events for 2021.
Okay, so 2021 will start probably in the same way that this year is ending with the pandemic. So we don't know what kind of travel we'll be doing, but suffice it to say, CSG Midwest has a lot of travel funding available for anybody who's interested in training that might be going on, or in paying for registration fees if there's a virtual meeting that you would like to attend and it's related to radioactive waste transportation. The next committee meeting will be June 15th. We'll get in touch with the committee members before then to sketch out some ideas. This will be, I think, in Dallas, Texas, assuming the NTSF meeting is able to meet in person. If not, we'll revert to a virtual session, just like we've done this fall and last spring. I think it's a good idea to have, I think Chris is the one who was talking about a newcomers orientation. We do have a lot of new committee members, and we might even have some more by the time the committee meets in June. So we'll plan on having a short newcomers orientation either at that meeting or in advance, so that folks will, we can help people get up to speed on what the committee is and does. Also thinking ahead to the NTSF meeting, last night I submitted the comments from the Midwest on the DOE Order 460.2B. Thanks Mike and Tiffany and Kelly for providing comments. I reviewed it myself as well. And I do think it would be a really good idea to have a discussion or maybe some breakout sessions at the NTSF meeting. So Chris and Mitch, you guys are both on the agenda planning. I would suggest trying to work in something to walk through that order, which maybe it'll be finalized by then, I don't know. But that would be a good topic for discussion. And if it doesn't make it to the NTSF agenda, I think that would be good for the committee to include a conversation with the DOE folks like Julia Shank and Erica Bickford during the committee meeting. There's a site visit to Dresden. This is following up on the virtual site visit to Morris that we did. And that was originally going to be in April, then it got bumped to the week before the NTSF meeting, but now it's going to be bumped again, I believe, because the Illinois folks are not available that week. So stay tuned for information about that. I mentioned, or a couple of people have mentioned waste management, and I mentioned that we have funding. So Mitch and I both actually are co-authoring a paper that Steve Maharis is writing on the virtual site visit to Morris. And so if anybody is interested in attending, it's supposed to be March 7th through 11th in Phoenix. I cannot imagine it's going to be in person. But if somebody would like to go to Phoenix, if it's in person, please let me know. If you just want to tune in virtually, I don't know if they'll still charge their whopping $900 registration fee. But if you'd like to attend virtually and see some of the transportation sessions, we can make that happen. And then another activity that's coming up in 2021, we talked about this Tuesday, the planning guide is going to be updated, not just the state and tribal information in the appendix sections, but the recommended practices themselves. That'll take place ideally, the review before the committee's June 15th meeting, so that at that meeting you'll be able to review the recommendations and approve the new language if there are any changes. And so that's a great segue into Tiffany's next agenda item, which is to recruit volunteers to work on the planning guide review group.
I was so successful in the co-chair thing. So as we discussed yesterday or Tuesday, Casey Struder was heavily involved in a lot of the committee work. And with her leaving her position, there are a number of vacancies on committees that we need to have people volunteer for. The first one being the NTSF Planning Committee. Casey was involved in that. So we need one member to join Mike on that committee to help with that coming up for the sprint. I believe the next call is in a week or so. I know Chris mentioned it. So
next Friday, the 20th.
That's what I thought. So is anybody interested in helping out with the NTS Planning Committee?
And this does not.
This is James Rochilla. I'd be happy to help out with that planning committee.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Next, we need 3 individuals to help with Mitch working on the Midwest Planning Review Guide, or Midwest Planning Guide Review, suggesting edits to the recommended practices. If anybody has questions on that, Mitch will happily explain that to you in further detail.
Yeah, so this group met and worked 2 years ago. Paul Schmidt and Mike Snee worked with me, and that just involved 4 or 5 virtual meetings, as well as just reviewing the plan recommended practices on your own time. And then we just walked through it together, discussed the suggested changes, and then submitted it to the MRMTC at our spring meeting. It's not too much work, it's mostly reading, but it helped me get up to date really quickly on our work and get to hang out with me virtually. So go ahead and nominate yourself. And I did want to reiterate that all of these positions do not have to be committee assignments or alternatives. Anybody involved in the Midwest can work on these projects.
I'll be around long enough to help one more time, so sign me up.
Paul?
I'll sign up for that too.
Paul, Greg, got room for one more?
Hey, Mitch, I was on it last time, so I can help out, but I'll happily give somebody else a chance. I'd just like to say that we should probably really look at the DOE draft order 460.2B. There's a lot of good information in there that we might be able to pull into our planning guide, so just want to throw that out there.
Sounds good. Sorry I forgot you, Rodney. I did not mean to, but anybody want to take up Rodney's offer? Otherwise, he'll be the third man. Sorry, Swap On, did you try and say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, okay, I can help with that one.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll start off with 4 and see how it goes.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine to have 4.
Great. Thank you all very much.
All right. The last one we have is one member to join the Regional Tribal Engagement Work Group. I believe Greg is working on that. And Casey had been. So if we have somebody else who would like to be involved in that.
Sorry, Tiffany, I should have noticed this before, but I already reached out to Aaron Kolonki offline, and he'll be joining the work group.
Okay.
Yep, I'm in.
Thank you, Aaron.
Awesome. Then I don't have to worry about that. I would like to thank everybody who's volunteered again for their commitment. And now I guess we need to turn it over to Mitch for any action items from today.
Yeah, so we have a few action items. The first being Melanie Snyder will send the Western Interstate Energy Board's comments on those consolidated interim storage facility environmental impact statements to Tiffany. CSG Midwest will send a copy of our printed transportation issues archive to Rick Moore. He's requested that physical copy of that. If anybody else would like a physical copy of that once it's printed, please reach out to myself or Lisa. And finally, we will pass along our new NTSF Planning Committee rep, James Roshilla, your contact information to Ellen, and our new co-chair, Mike Snee, will get you set up with Erica and all the other planning committee. No, sorry, that's for something else. But we'll send along all that contact information.
Yeah, it's for the Transportation Core Group, because that group's going to be meeting virtually in December for a brief check-in. And I know Erica's waiting for all the regions to identify who their new co-chairs are so that she can send out the doodle poll next week, I believe.
Okay. We are just about done. I don't really have any closing remarks other than thanks you for attending. We appreciate all of the questions that were asked and all of our presenters who hung on with us, especially through today. Thanks for everyone for their participation. And I guess we will see you hopefully in person in Dallas. We'll see. And Mike, we need to stay on for a minute just for a photo. However they're going to do that, I don't know.
Thank you, everyone.
We got to figure it out. Thanks everybody for attending and speaking.
Take care.
Thank
Have
you.
a good weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.